present. All of our jurors and alternates have returned to the courtroom. I took an opportunity to meditate during the lunch hour, and I recommend it to anyone who can find a space for that. I think it may be useful to you in this storm. So, we all ready? Counsel, you may proceed, Mr. Lewis.
We're the cause of the judge having to meditate.
Good.
All right, so the evidence is going to show that the defendant responded to Kathie's growing independence by attempting to regain control through violence.
She said the two of you went to a party and that you were both drunk and you came home, and that was the first time that she remembers that you had hit her. You had an argument and that you slapped her or something like that. Do you remember that?
No, I don't remember the first time I had slapped her either.
Do you remember other times that
Oh yeah, by 1981, our life was half arguments, fighting, slapping, pushing, wrestling.
Can everybody hear that, by the way? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. All right. The defendant also discussed the domestic violence as he was watching the DVD commentary of the movie. So what you're going to see on your left side of the screen, actually on this screen here, this is the movie All Good Things. The individual that you see is Ryan Gosling playing the Bob Durst character in the movie. And so now what you're going to hear is you're not going to be hearing the movie. You're going to be seeing the movie as Mr. Durst was seeing the movie, and you're going to be hearing his commentary.
I knew that she was doing bad in school, had gotten a whole bunch of incompletes, and I was under the impression that she wasn't sure she was going to graduate. This is close. After a number of years, before I would go to her family's house for a function, I would insist that we agree on how long we're going to stay. 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. We would always do a negotiation. When the time was up, I was ready to leave. Seen the story about the hair two different ways. One way, I drag her out of the house by her hair. The other way, I grab her hair and a big chunk comes out. Either one is close enough.
The issue was again discussed during the 2010 interviews.
I went inside and grabbed Kathie. It's time to go, let's go.
And we talked about the various stories about that. Tell me what you remember about going back in there. And
I remember grabbing her by her hair and grabbing her arm, getting her coat. We're going.
And the grabbing her by her hair part, how did that enter your mind, or
No, I went back in to get Kathie. Kathie, it's time to go. Well, just another, no, we're going.
and from your standpoint, was it that you were pissed off, you were angry?
Yes, I was pissed off. She agreed to leave after a certain period of time, and now she's not doing it. She's wrong, I'm right, let's go.
And you described that there were a couple of theories about whether you pulled her by her hair, whether it chunk.
Yeah, whether I pulled a chunk of her hair out, and I remember grabbing her by the coat and her arm and the hair. Whether her hair came out or not, I don't know, but I dragged her out of the house.
Do you remember the feeling of that happening as we're sitting here? Do you remember the feeling of walking into the house, going to get her? Is that?
Yes, total anger. We're not doing this. It was me being the dominant one. We agree on 2 hours. It's going to be 2 hours. Not going to be 2.5 hours or 2 hours and 20 minutes. It's time to go. You agreed to go. Let's go. The same thing with having a child. You agreed that we weren't going to have children. You got yourself pregnant. You want to get an abortion. You can get an abortion. You want to have a child. You're going to get divorced. And the hair pulling wasn't even the worst. There were numerous, I don't know, numerous, a whole bunch of other times I would grab her and say, we're leaving.
The deteriorating marriage and the pressures of medical school led Kathie to use cocaine and the abuse of sleep medication while she was in medical school. Kathie also had at least herself 2 extramarital affairs. Now by 1981, the evidence is going to show that Kathie was preparing to divorce Bob Durst. The marriage had really gone downhill, and the defendant really describes where the marriage was at and how now Kathie was responding to him as she was taking back control of her life.
And she was taking control of the marriage by threatening to divorce me. And I figured, you know, if we just drop the lawyers, maybe I'll be here in 6 months again with the same thing, because I hadn't changed. I was still the same controlling person. I wasn't about to have her telling me what to do. She had gotten there to a large extent.
When you say you were controlling in your relationship with her, give me an example of what.
Oh, I would choose a restaurant. When we got to the restaurant, I would look at the menu and say, well, I'm thinking of this or that. What are you thinking of? And then, well, why don't you get this, get you know, the such and such, and I'll get the other, and then we can trade a little bit. And, you know, she went along with that for a while, and then she just got tired of it. You have what you want, I'm going to have what I want. The end. And I want you to leave my food alone. And a lot of times with me canceling things all the time, we'd be planning on going out to dinner Friday night, and now it's Friday morning and I don't want to go.
The evidence is going to show that the violence was not simply, the domestic violence was not simply confined to Kathie. On February 1st, 1981, Kathie invited some friends over to the East 86th Street apartment in Manhattan. One of those friends was a local photographer named Peter Schwartz, who did not know Bob Durst. He had met him, I think, once before, but they didn't know each other. You're gonna hear videotape testimony from him of what happened that night.
Were there any other males in the room when Robert Durst arrived?
I was the only male.
What happened after you saw him?
While I was sitting there, he looked at Kathie, and then he looked over at me, and he said, well, you're the only man here, or the only guy here.
We'll stop here.
Mm-hmm.
What was his tone of voice when he said, you're the only guy here?
It was threatening.
What was his facial expression when he said, you're the only guy here?
He looked enraged.
If you know, if you recall, or even if you observe, what, if anything, was his facial expression when he first looked over towards Kathie?
He looked angry.
What happened next after he said, well, you're the only guy here?
He rushed forward and kicked me in the eye. I was sitting on the floor with my back against the radiator. And when he rushed forward, even though I had my knees up and my arms over my knees, he kicked between my legs and between my arms and kicked me under the right eye, fracturing the bone.
A little hard to hear, but what the evidence is going to show is that Peter Schwartz was there with his girlfriend, and they were on the living room floor. His girlfriend was present with Kathie. Bob Durst came back into the apartment. Peter Schwartz's girlfriend was there as well, and he became enraged, yelling that why was he the only man there. And then, without any warning, without anything happening between, he literally ran up to Peter Schwartz. He was wearing boots, and Peter Schwartz is on the floor, and he kicks him with the toe of the boot in the face, in his orbital bone. Now that was done in front of Kathie Durst. The evidence is going to show that That too was domestic violence. Now, Peter Schwartz ended up having a broken orbital bone. It was not a minor injury. He reported the incident to the NYPD's 19th precinct at the time. There were other people there. You're going to hear from Kathie Tradesman. And Kathie Tradesman is going to describe, she's going to tell you what it was she saw.
We went back to the apartment and they were there and, you know, just kind of not doing anything bad, but they were just, you know, there talking or whatever, and he was on the floor. My recollection is he was on the floor like, resting on his elbow, and Bob came in and kicked him in the face. And I guess, you know, I get hazy after that, because I think we left and he went to the emergency room. Peter went to the emergency room and he had like a cracked bone or broken bone in his face, and I mean, he was injured. But, you know, so it was the first time that I had ever seen any violence from Bob. But it was scary. You know, it was probably the first time I ever saw violence from anyone close to me like that. So it was, you know, it was alarming.
So as a result, in addition to contacting police, Peter Schwartz ended up filing a civil suit against Durst over the assault, and that lawsuit would play a key role in what would eventually happen to Kathie, which we will get to. Now, throughout this period, Durst and Kathie's relationship was continuing to worsen. So we're now at March 27th, 1981. And this is documented by the acrimonious letters that they are exchanging. This is a letter from Bob to Kathie, and it's laying out the fact that there's going to be a divorce, and that, in essence, they're discussing splitting up the property, etc. The letter says, in June of 1980, you told me you wanted your own space, and at your request, I moved out of the apartment at 12 East 86th Street, where we've lived since August 1978. So, what's going to be very apparent from the evidence, what the evidence is going to show, is that Kathie was primarily living in the East 86th Street apartment. Bob Durst was primarily living in the Riverside Drive apartment. And like many domestic violence relationships, they still would see each other. In fact, when we get there, Kathie is going to be killed by Bob Durst when they are spending the weekend together in South Salem. The evidence is going to show no one forced Kathie to go there. But that's what you're going to be shown. That's what the evidence is going to demonstrate. The letter continues that this attitude is no longer realistic, and at this time, a divorce seems the only possibility. And this is back March 27th, 1981. And the countdown has started. The evidence is going to show that by the time we get to March 27th, 1982, Kathie's going to be dead. The letter continues. When we moved to East 86th Street, I brought with me most of the personal belongings I had accumulated at this time. I would like them returned, specifically books, records, clothes. I think there are a couple of jackets and boots in the hall closet, artwork, none of which has monetary value, documents, letters, etc. in my desk. Further, the following pieces of furniture. So that's where things stood in March. By the fall of '81, the domestic violence is worsening. Sometime, it appears in September, they were having an argument in their penthouse at Riverside Drive. And in the middle of a rainstorm, Kathie climbs out the window onto a balcony, and she sought refuge in the neighboring penthouse, in the residence. Now, what you're going to see next is going to be a reenactment in the movie All Good Things of this incident. So again, these are actors and actresses recreating this incident, but what's going to be important are going to be Bob Durst's comments about it as he is watching.
maybe she thought she'd get me to, have a child with her, but that she wouldn't be just the passive one, and this would give her some control over me. This is more or less accurate. I don't know why she would go in our neighbor's window as opposed to go to their door. But it was pouring and we were having a wrestling, shoving type fight. And she ran out on the terrace and ran into their apartment. Said she was afraid to come home. Said she didn't want to go home. She doesn't have to come home.
Did the neighbor have a door on the same terrace, or the neighbor?
Yes, we shared the top terrace. We were in the front overlooking Riverside Drive. They were in the back.
Oh, I see. When she said she was afraid to come home, did you feel like that was something she was saying to the neighbor as a kind of a way of making things public or trying to pressure you, or did you feel like she was really afraid to come home?
I had no idea. I didn't really care one way or the other what she did. It was late and I was just tired.
You remember what the fight was about?
No.
Were there subjects that became, the typical subjects you would fight about?
Well, like where we were going or where we weren't going or whether we were going to go to South Salem for the weekend or not, like that.
Now, the evidence is going to show that almost without exception, Mr. Durst not only does not deny these incidents of domestic violence, he freely admits them. And in addition, the evidence will show he doesn't just admit them once. He will come back at different times and he will reiterate the same information as he did during the subsequent interviews in 2010 with Mr. Jarecki.
When we were talking about the terrace incident, or her climbing out onto the terrace during the, you said that they came over and they said, well, she's afraid to come home, or the neighbor.
Yeah, she's afraid to come home.
And your reaction to that was to say, well, she doesn't want to come home. She doesn't have to
She doesn't have to come home. She got the other apartment over on 86th Street. She wants me to get out of here so she can get some stuff together. Whatever she wants to do, she can do. I don't care.
And when you said you didn't care, what did that mean? You didn't care?
It's late at night. I'm tired. I want to go to sleep. She can do whatever she wants to do.
Was that a big fight compared to other incidents
That
between
was a
you?
mini fight. The fact that she climbed out the window made it a big fight, but that wasn't a big thing. It didn't go on long. All of a sudden she's climbing out the window. I was already, getting ready to go to bed.
Ann Anderson Doyle and her husband Kevin occupied that adjacent penthouse at 37 Riverside Drive. She's going to come and testify. She's going to fly out here from Australia where they now live. And she's going to tell you that in the middle of the night, in a rainstorm, Kathie's pounding on their window, terrified. She's going to tell you that Kathie told her that Bob Durst had beaten and that he had threatened her. She's going to tell you that Kathie said she literally feared for her life. And the evidence is going to show that Kathie told her that Durst had a gun and that she was afraid that he was going to shoot her. She's going to further tell you that while they were talking, Kathie was crying and terrified. She was so afraid that she didn't want to be in the bedroom where there was a window, where potentially someone could see in. And then literally, they went inside. It's a tiny, basically it's a studio penthouse. The Doyle's penthouse is very small. And she's going to tell you they went in the bathroom and they're basically cowering in the bathroom. as Kathie is telling her this story, crying and terrified. That was Kathie's life about 5 months before he was going to kill her. Now, this incident was not reported to police at the time. And the evidence is going to show that back in 1981, we were a different society than we are today. That domestic violence happened and oftentimes it never got reported. The police don't find out about this until after Kathie disappears on January 31st, 1982, and they go back and they're now interviewing people. Detective James Varian, you're going to hear his videotaped testimony as well. And at the time that he testified, which is within the last couple of years, he is reading from the report that he and his partner authored years ago. So obviously we're talking about a time where it's almost 40 years after the incident. He's going to say that his report related that Ann said that she let her in, meaning Kathie, told her that Bob had beat her and that he wanted to kill her. And that Kathie told Ann, who told the detective, that Durst had a gun and Kathie was afraid of being shot. Janet Fink Shaw was another friend of Kathie's. She's also going to testify. She was also their former housekeeper in South Salem. So remember, Bob and Kathie had 3 different residences, and 2 are in Manhattan and 1 is in South Salem. So the South Salem house, Janet Fink would clean it, but over time she became less kind of a house cleaner and more of a friend. She became a friend to both Bob and Kathie. And when she testifies, she's going to tell you that she liked both of them. She liked Kathie and she liked Bob. She's also going to tell you that Kathie described the Riverside Drive incident to her, what had happened.
The Riverside apartment, or the 86th Street apartment, and moved back over to go stay at the Riverside apartment. And so they had an argument, and she tried to get out of the room, and she tried to escape through the window. There was like a roof kind of decking that went over to the other apartment, which was only 2 on the top. And he pulled her back through the windows, and she told me how, her legs were just totally scraped, and, he wouldn't let her get out of the apartment. And I remember being really horrified at that point, and, I always told her, I said, listen, my advice was she should get like a serious dog and one that was already trained, and, she needed to just, plan her escape and just go and don't even worry about the money, because that's always my philosophy. Just leave and don't even think about those things. You have to think about your safety, and obviously I was worried about her safety because, yes, that was just one conversation of a physical situation, and, that sounded super scary.
Now, the evidence is going to show that at the time that she was killed, Kathie was a 4th-year medical student. She's almost a doctor. She's going to graduate in a matter of months. And the evidence is going to show that Kathie's a strong woman. She's nobody's doormat. But the evidence is also going to show that, like a lot of strong women, she was a victim of someone who was abusing her. And she made the decision to remain in the relationship. And the evidence is going to show that that decision is going to cost her her life. January 6, 1982, the evidence will show this is now 24 days before Bob Durst is going to kill her. On that date, she goes to Jacobi Medical Center. You're going to hear evidence that Jacobi Medical Center was a part of Albert Einstein, the medical school Kathie went to. So Kathie, who's a young medical student, who's actually doing rotations at Albert Einstein, she's doing rotation at this hospital. The evidence is going to show that she literally goes there and she explains to them that she has been a victim of domestic violence. Now, the evidence is going to show that she does not tell the doctor that Bob Durst is the one who did it. And again, the evidence will demonstrate that, like a lot of women in that situation, she was afraid and embarrassed, and she didn't reveal who her batterer was. So she goes to the hospital. She is treated. Bob Durst is later questioned about this by Andrew Jarecki in 2010, excuse me. I keep saying 11. Let me be clear. If I'm saying 2010, there are 3 interviews, December 11th, 12th, and 13th of 2010. The last interview is April 18th, 2012. I don't know why I keep saying 2011. Mr. Milius scolded me at lunch, and now I did it again. So if I say 2011, that is a mistake on my part. So Mr. Durst is going to be confronted about that visit to the hospital. But the way that it is done, Mr. Jarecki does not show Mr. Durst the information that he has. He doesn't let Mr. Durst know, here's what I know. He asks him about it. And at that time, this is what Mr. Durst said.
Did you ever create any marks on her face, or did you create that?
No, I never saw any marks on her face, and I wouldn't hit her in the face.
Did you, if you were going to have a physical altercation with her, what would typically happen? Would you-
Pushing and shoving and get out of here, or whatever it was, that would be the physical altercation. Falling down now and then, but I never hit her in the face. I never saw anything on her face, and neither did anybody else ever see anything on her face.
Now, the evidence will show, as you heard from the clip, that Mr. Durst did not deny that he would assault Kathie. What he said was, I never hit her in the face, and if you watched, he then made a move punching forward with his fists. That's what he was confronted with, but that's not the end of the story.
So your sense of this Jacoby Hospital visit is that if the guys at Jacoby Hospital wrote a report that said that she
I
had...
never saw any such report. The police didn't either. And the way I found out about Jacoby Hospital was not from Kathie, but after Kathie disappeared, then it was brought up either by Gilberti or the police, and they asked me the questions you're asking me.
So Mr. Durst absolutely denied that that incident ever happened. However, there's a report from the hospital, January 6, 1982. You're going to actually hear from the physician who treated Kathie. If you look at the report, what the report says is 29-year-old female with history of blunt trauma to left side of face. Patient allegedly slapped with hand. That's what she told the doctor. You're going to hear from that doctor. That doctor's going to tell you that back in 1982, it was not unusual for women to come in, professional women, and to not identify their abuser. And you're going to learn something else, that Kathie was going in to the very hospital where she worked at as a doctor, a medical student. That very hospital. But not as a medical student, as a victim. And that she was ashamed and embarrassed. Now, though the medical forms not indicate who assaulted Kathie, Kathie was legally married to Bob Durst at this time. They were married at the time he killed her. Yet, the evidence will show...
That's the third time, Judge. I've got to object to this conclusion that he repeats. That is that Bob Durst killed Kathie first.
The evidence is going to show very clearly and unequivocally and beyond any doubt that Bob Durst killed Kathie Durst. That's what the evidence will show in this case. Now, as I was saying, they were legally married at the time, yet on the admission slip, Kathie listed her mother as her next of kin. Dr. Peter Halperin is also going to testify by video. And again, we covered this in voir dire, so the reason that you're seeing images of individuals is that they ended up, when you see him on the witness stand, he was a witness. He testified at a prior hearing, and that hearing, both sides have stipulated, is going to be utilized instead of his trial testimony. You're seeing Dr. Halperin as he looks now, but Dr. Halperin was a classmate of Kathie's, and he's going to describe what happened during a rotation they had together. He's going to tell you that they did the same radiology rotation. So you're going to hear from these doctors who are going to come in here who went to medical school with Kathie. They're all doctors now. Many are even retired because it's been almost 40 years. They're going to come in and Dr. Halperin's going to tell you that he remembers this radiology rotation. He remembers Kathie Durst. And he's going to tell you that that rotation, the evidence will show that that took place December 24th of 1981 to January 24th of 1982. Now, he's not going to be able to tell you the exact day that these incidents occurred, but he's going to tell you during that month-long period, this is what happened. He's going to say that one day during the rotation, Kathie had what appeared to him to be some kind of panic attack.
There was a particular interaction that she was having with one of the professors, the attending radiologist, who was asking her some basic questions. And she could barely speak. And it was crystal clear to me that she was petrified. That she was having some kind of near panic attack. And in fact, this attending said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "It's clear that she's extremely anxious about something," right in front of everybody, because it was so palpable. And this is before the conversation about her husband, so I had the faintest idea what she could be so frightened about. I didn't think it was not knowing the answer to the question, though. It was just so completely out of proportion. She looked absolutely fear-struck and on the verge of a full-blown panic attack. And maybe that was a signal to her that I was somebody she could talk to.
And then Dr. Halperin's going to tell you that when you're doing rotations as a medical student in your last year of medical school, you're going to be applying for a residency when you're done. So it's really important because you need to impress the doctors that you're working with. And the doctors will, in what's commonly called pimping, the doctors will pimp the medical students with all kinds of questions while they're doing rounds. And it can be very stressful. But he's going to tell you that that wasn't what this response was about. He's going to tell you that Kathie, who was normally she was a little bit older of a medical student than most of the others that she was with. This is really out of character for her. He had not seen it before, and she was extremely upset. Now, he's going to tell you that after that time, he's at home later that evening with his wife, Martha. You're going to also hear her testimony as well. He's going to tell you that he received a phone call from Kathie. And he's going to tell you he and Kathie were not close. He hardly knew her. They weren't really friends. But he's going to describe this call from Kathie.
And when she called you up on the phone, can you describe what her demeanor was?
She was petrified. Her voice was shaky.
When you say petrified, can you explain a little bit?
Well, her voice was shaking. She was clearly very anxious. She was talking a little bit with kind of pressured speech. She was clearly very upset. I didn't hear her cry, but both her words and the contents of her conversation, kind of were the same. She was telling me that he had really viciously beat up this guy, and that she was worried that he would beat her up or hurt her. And I didn't ask more details. I couldn't ask, has he hit you yet? I only wanted to get her the hell out of there. It was so clear that it was dangerous. It was just totally clear.
Kathie didn't leave. The evidence is going to show that in the middle of this divorce, Kathie wanted what she believed was a fair settlement. And she was not going to leave the marriage without getting what she thought she was entitled to. Now, by 1982, by this time, Bob Durst was basically living in the Riverside Drive penthouse. Kathie was living in East 86th Street, which again was much closer to the hospital. In January of '82, the property manager at East 86th Street was Karen Minatello. Now, Bob and Kathie had a pretty large two-bedroom apartment at East 86th Street. Karen Minatello, again, she testified previously. You're going to hear her videotape testimony. Karen Minatello is going to tell you that about 2 weeks before Kathie's disappearance, Kathie called her.
She called me and she was a little vague at first, but then she started out asking if there was an empty apartment in the building because she wanted to rent her own apartment. And I didn't have anything at the time. And then she started talking a little more personal, like she really needed to move out of the apartment with him, and could I let her or her sister know as soon as there was anything available. And did she say why? She indicated she just needed to get away from him.
Despite the tensions, the domestic violence, and the situation that was clearly spiraling downhill, Kathie still saw Bob Durst. Apparently, the evidence is still cared for him. And they still spent time together. And one of those times was Sunday, January 31st, 1982. They were together at the Lakeside Cottage in South Salem, New York. January 31st, 1982 would also be the last day of Kathie's life, because that evening, her husband Bob was going to kill her. Now that afternoon, Kathie went to a party at her friend Gilberta Najami's house. Gilberta Najami is since deceased. And that was in Connecticut. Now, for the geographers so that you understand, where she lived in Connecticut was about 45 minutes to an hour away from South Salem, New York. Basically, Westchester County is on the border. So Kathie ended up going to a party at Gilberta's, and this is actually Gilberta's parents' house. You're going to hear from Fadwa Najami, who is Gilberta's sister. She's going to testify in this case. Now, while at the party, Kathie calls up Peter Schwartz. If you remember, Peter Schwartz is the guy that Bob had assaulted about a year earlier. And there was a civil suit that Kathie was aware about. Now, during this call, they discussed the civil suit that Peter Schwartz had filed against Durst related to that assault. Peter took notes during the conversation and testified about what had happened. He said that Kathie expressed her strong desire that Peter proceed with his civil suit against Durst. Peter responded that he had settled the litigation. So basically, he had come to an agreement with Bob Durst, a settlement, and that case was going to go away. He's going to tell you that Kathie made very clear that she was very upset as a result of the settlement because she was not going to be able to use the assault as leverage in her divorce.
Do they want to hear?
And when she was acting as Peter, did it sound like she was a concerned wife trying to make sure that her husband was not going to suffer any adverse consequences, or did it seem like something else?
Yeah, that's very funny. No, she was not coming off as a concerned wife.
what was she coming off as, Peter?
I mean, to me, what it was about was that she wanted more that she could utilize for her benefit of whatever it is that she was trying to accomplish. And it wasn't to repair her marriage. At least that was my impression.
So basically what you're saying is, it sounds like your take was Kathie was hoping to utilize your situation for leverage in her dealings with her husband, and it did not involve saving their marriage.
Absolutely.
Peter Schwartz is going to testify. He's going to tell you that Kathie made it very clear that she was aggravated during the call.
I do recall that she appeared to be very aggravated over the phone.
And aggravated, in other words, aggravated just in general, or kind of aggravated based on she was not hearing what she wanted to hear from you?
I would say both. She seemed to be aggravated in general, and she seemed to be aggravated that I wasn't giving her what she wanted.
Now, Bob Durst is going to be questioned in 2010 by Andrew Jarecki regarding his conversations with Kathie while she was at Gilberta's that Sunday afternoon. And he's going to freely admit that they spoke on the phone.
And you spoke to her before she left the party?
Yes. I called her to remind her that, you know, we got to get up and we got to get out of here, and I'm going to take the dog back to the kennel because he had this procedure done, but it still wasn't all fixed. They said, yeah, you want to take him for the weekend. If he's good, that's terrific, but you want to bring him back on Monday. And I had this closing with Douglas. I was buying a property on 43rd Street. I think we were supposed to be there at noon.
Now, Gilberta Najami's sister, Fatwa, was also at that party. She's going to tell you that she was present when Kathie took a phone call from Bob. She's going to tell you she could not hear Bob's end of the conversation, but she could hear a part of Kathie's.
Okay, there was something going on with Bobby, and she was upset about that. And the phone rang, and at some point, I don't remember if it was after dinner or not. It had to be after dinner, I'm pretty sure, because I think she left the house at 7. Mm-hmm. Bobby called Gilberta's phone, and I remember standing on the wall next to the phone, because it was a wall-mounted phone, and she answered it. And I remember, like, watching her face, because she was being nice to him.
Did her demeanor at all change when she hung up the phone and basically...
I think she made a statement. I can't quote her exactly, but it was kind of like, he's really pissed, I have to go.
Now, the evidence is going to show that after the call, Kathie left. She drove from Connecticut back to the South Salem residence, which was about an hour away. Now, the next day, Monday, February 1st, 1982, Kathie was supposed to begin her first day of an ambulatory pediatric clinic at Bronx Memorial Hospital. Now, you're going to hear from numerous doctors that are going to come in and testify. And they're going to explain to you that as a medical student, you do different rotations. Some rotations, for instance, if you're doing a surgical rotation, you might have to stay over at the hospital. Other rotations are clinics that have more normal hours. And the rotation Kathie was due to start was her ambulatory pediatric clinic at Bronx Memorial Hospital, which is basically a part of the hospitals that are right next to each other as Jacoby. It's the same place. So Monday, February 1st, at 9 o'clock, Kathie was supposed to show up and was supposed to be oriented. This is the planner from the doctor, the attending physician, who was supposed to be orienting Kathie along with some other doctors as well. Kathie never made it. That was February 1st, 1982. It's been now 38 years. Now, Bob Durst waited 4 days before reporting his wife missing. When he did report her missing, he reported her missing not where she had last been seen, in Westchester County, but instead he went into Manhattan and he went to the 20th precinct. He walked into the 20th precinct and he filed a missing persons report. And he was interviewed by NYP detective Mike Struck. Now, at the time of the interview, Bob Durst was holding this 2-year-old magazine titled The Men Who Own New York. That's what he was carrying in there. And one of the men, the 5 men who were on there, these are basically the titans of New York real estate at the time. One of them is Seymour Durst, Bob's father.
Went to the city. Friday morning, went to the office. Went to the police precinct that afternoon. Made a fuss about the missing person, medical school, rich person. And then they started investigating and how's the marriage doing, and I started out with not so bad, and I spoke to Gilbert and Mary and found out, it was pretty terrible.
I want to make sure that you were able to hear what Mr. Durst said. He said that they asked him how the marriage was, and he said, not so bad. And he says, then they spoke to Gilbert and Mary, Kathie's sister, and they found out, oh, it's pretty terrible. The evidence is going to show that this would just be a pattern of Bob Durst lying and obfuscating the truth. A pattern that's continued to this day. Now, the story that Bob Durst related regarding Sunday night, January 31st, was the following. He said Kathie returned from Gilberta's party. He said they had a sandwich. Durst put Kathie on a train back to New York City. He then said he visited his neighbors, that's going to be the mayors, and he wasn't doing anything nefarious. He said he spoke with Kathie by phone between 11 and 11:15 p.m. She seemed fine. She was watching TV in their Riverside Drive penthouse. So his story was Kathie made it home, and they spoke while she was at Riverside Drive in that penthouse. He said whatever happened to Kathie afterward was a result of her drug use, promiscuity, and criminal companions. Now the evidence is going to show that each of these assertions was false. The first, they had a sandwich and Durst put Kathie on a train back to New York City. However, in 2010, Durst actually admitted that they had a violent argument that night.
So the night that she disappeared, that Sunday night, or the last night that you saw her, I think, you want to just take me through what you remember happening that night?
She gets back from Gilbert's, maybe 7 or whatever, angry at me, loaded, walks around the house, doing stuff, and announcing that she wants to go to the city. I said, you can go to the city if you want, but you can't drive, and I'm not going to go to the city. And
She couldn't drive because of her condition. She was.
You drive any time, her condition didn't bother me at all. We only had one car, we just had the Mercedes up there. So I wasn't going to go back Sunday night. So the car and me and the dog were staying in South Salem. You can't take the dog to the kennel Sunday night anyway, until Monday when I had to take the dog to the kennel and go into the city. So if she wants to go to the city, she can take the train. And she says, no, I'm taking the car. And I went and got the keys out of the car and told her that she's not taking the car because I'm not giving her the keys. And if I wasn't not giving her the keys because she was loaded, I mean, she'd driven back from Gilbert's house just as loaded, no problem. But this was her thing. She wants to go to the city, I'll take her to the train station. She wants to go to the city, she can call a cab, but she's not taking the car. That was an argument.
Was that argument just a verbal argument?
No, that was a pushing and shoving argument.
That statement was made by Mr. Durst on December 12, 2010 to Mr. Duecki. he was very clear that they had a pushing and shoving argument. Now the next clip you're going to hear is from one day later. What the evidence is going to show is that Bob Durst has a history and a problem with remembering his own lies. So the next day, one day later, this is the conversation he has with Mr. Jarecki.
We didn't have a fight, we didn't wrestle, you didn't touch her.
The night that
She disappeared.
was the other day,
We were
you,
on the train.
yeah. But you did tell me in our last conversation that you did have a physical altercation that night.
I don't think I had a physical altercation that night. You're sure I told you that? 'Cause she came home, she was yelling and screaming. I don't remember pushing. I do remember going into the bedroom and locking the door and taking a pill. I don't remember any pushing and shoving.
The Bob Durst version of the story was that he took Kathie to the train station and that she got on the train. The evidence will show, though, that there's no witnesses or evidence that Kathie ever got on that train. The only evidence that she ever made it on that train is going to come from Bob Durst. Now, Durst then visited his neighbors, and he said he wasn't doing anything nefarious. Talked to his neighbor, Bill Mayer. However, Durst's neighbor, Bill Mayer, completely impeaches his claim. He's going to testify. What he's going to tell you is that, again, the evidence is going to show that Bob Durst literally tells the detective, I was with Bill Mayer. Of course, the detective's going to talk to Bill Mayer, you would think. Detective talks to Bill Mayer. This is what Bill Mayer says.
He just, I assume, fabricated that story without ever coming here for a drink or even discussing with us in any way. So he didn't ask us to lie for him. He just, I guess, kind of fibbed for himself.
Now, the evidence is going to show that the reason that Bob Durst makes up these stories is that he doesn't want to take and make the effort to actually remember what it was he's told other people. Because as the evidence demonstrates, and as he will tell you, is in essence, he's lived his life doing what he wants, and it's worked. Now, in 2010, the evidence is going to show that one of the big shocking details that emerged from the Jarecki and Smerling interviews is that for the first time ever, Durst is going to casually admit that the story about going back to the neighbor's house was a complete fabrication. And he's going to explain why it was he said that. And if you listen to his explanation, you're going to understand who Bob Durst is.
And then you went to the mayor's.
Yeah, that's what I told the police. I was hoping that would just make everything go away. I didn't go to the mayor. I took her to the train station, went home, went to sleep.
And why would that have made everything go away?
Well, I'm at the mayor's. They wanted to hear, what did you do? So I told them I did that. I just never got through my mind. It was like a negotiation. You tell somebody something, and well, that's it. They don't go back there. They don't look for motive. And why is he telling me this kind of thing? I thought that would get them to, leave me alone, accept the missing person like that.
So the evidence is going to show that Bob Durst's view was that, well, if I tell them that's what it was, then they're just going to have to accept that because I'm Bob Durst. And he's going to expand upon that further in this same set of interviews on December 12th.
I don't know that I ever filled in all the little pieces of all that, but I just wanted to get it done with it. I'm going to report it, and that'll be that. I did not go through my mind that police ask oodles of questions and go here and there and everywhere. Just wasn't used to that. I was not used to somebody questioning my motive. questioning my veracity.
Durst said he spoke with Kathie by phone between 11 and 11:15 p.m. She seemed fine and was watching TV in their Riverside Drive penthouse. Remember, these are what he originally told Detective Struck about what had happened. Durst also spread this same story to the press back in February of 1982. He told the Post that he spoke to Kathie by telephone that Sunday night. She told him she was in bed watching TV. Told the Daily News on the same day. He spoke to his wife later in the evening by telephone. She did not indicate that anything was wrong. He said something similar to the Associated Press. Today, and by today I mean during the 2010 interviews, again, for the first time, Durst admits, you know what? I never talked to Kathie that night. That was a lie that I told to, quote, put her in the city.
Yes, that was the last part of my, the police are going to leave you alone now. I said, I called her, and I said I stopped at a payphone on the way home, or I went out for a walk later, and I called her from the payphone. She answered the phone, and that puts her in the city, and they're going to leave me alone now.
Just to clear up any possible misunderstanding, etc., Durst was specifically asked, did you speak to her that night?
Did you end up speaking to her that night?
No.
Now, the evidence is going to show that he did not report Kathie missing to the police in South Salem, even though that was the last place that he said he saw her. Now, this ensured that police focused their investigation in New York City, which was 50 miles in a whole other county from the location where the evidence suggests, the evidence, the circumstantial evidence in this case that we will present, will demonstrate that Kathie Durst never left that house. She got home and he killed her.
I'm going to report her missing, it's their problem. Put her on the train, she came to the city, I don't know where she is, she's not going to medical school. There's got to be something wrong.
Now, it was going to become their problem to figure out what the
Yes, the
truth
police
was.
look for missing persons, what am I supposed to do?
So I was going to show that Bob Durst's wife disappears, and his response, his level of concern was to say, it's not my job, it's what the police do. He said whatever happened to Kathie afterward was a result of her drug use, promiscuity, and criminal companions. Now, it was at this point in time, again, Kathie disappears on January 31st when he kills her. Bob Durst reports her, it's a Sunday, he reports her missing on Friday, February 4th. And within a few days, he enlists the help of his trusted and close friend, Susan Berman, to be his spokesperson. He referred to her as a spokesman. Now, Durst and Susan immediately began to disparage Kathie to the police, suggesting that she had a role in her own disappearance. So, Detective Struck interviewed Robert Durst, and he says that Kathie probably got 1 or 2 grams of cocaine from Mike Burns per week. You're going to hear from Mike Burns, and Mike Burns is a person that Kathie was somewhat dating at this point in time. And it is true. And Mike Burns is going to tell you that he did give Kathie cocaine. You're going to hear evidence that Kathie, like a lot of people, and it's going to be important for you to understand as jurors, that this is 1982 in New York City. And Mr. Durst and his family, because of their business connections, because of their real estate connections, this is back Studio 54, Xenon, the big clubs, and Xenon was in a Durst building. So Bob Durst could basically walk up with whoever he wanted, he could just go in. And the evidence will show without question, that Kathie appreciated the lifestyle that she had with Bob Durst. No question. The evidence is also going to show that Kathie Durst was just about to graduate from medical school. She was not a drug addict. She was a well-functioning doctor who had put her life somewhat back together after the incidents with Peter Schwartz and Dr. Halperin shortly before. Susan Berman was interviewed by Detective Strzok, and she tells Detective Strzok that Kathie would use Quaaludes, and that she thinks that the disappearance had something to do with drugs. Friends say that she's spending $1,000 per week on drugs. That's the story that Susan Berman is peddling. Now, the evidence is going to show it's not true. Kathie Durst doesn't have $1,000 a week to spend on drugs. Kathie Durst is borrowing money to pay for her tuition, and Kathie Durst is going to medical school, doing rotations, and dealing with patients and getting good evaluations as she prepares to graduate and start her residency. Now, they also spread similar negative stories to the press. Bob Durst talked to the press a few months after his wife's disappearance, said she had some sort of quasi-breakdown, she was doing badly in medical school, she was doing badly in her life, she was unhappy. The evidence is going to show that it's not true. Did somebody? Oh, I'm sorry, I thought someone said something, I apologize. Also, the statements were spread that Kathie had likely, she was using cocaine, and she probably got her involved with bad elements who were somehow responsible for the disappearance. This is the story that was being peddled. Durst said his wife drove a flashy red Mercedes and wore expensive clothing and diamond earrings and drew attention to herself. And then it's going to show that Kathie was kind of a more, like a granola type of woman, not like a fancy, you know, pearls, etc. But that's what was being spun to the press. Now, the version of events, the summary of what Durst originally said was, on October 31st, 1982, Kathie and Durst were together in South Salem. They had a pushing and shoving argument. He put her on a train back to the city. He then visited the mayors. He spoke with her by phone that evening. Her disappearance was her own fault. She was never heard from again. Now, when we eliminate the statements that only come from Durst and Susan Berman, or those that have otherwise been discredited, what remains of this statement? On January 31st, 1982, Bob Durst and his wife were together in South Salem that evening when she came home. They had a pushing and shoving argument. She was never heard from again. No, I don't know when the court is a break, but this is a good time if it works for the court.
It is a good time. Thank you, Mr. Lewin. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for